going to go to item 17, page 155, and sorry, yep. Yeah, 1, 2, 3, 4, 5, 6. So we're on page 155, Bourne Street Festival. I'll just hand over to. I'm about to move a procedural motion, but I'm not going to move it yet until the General Manager has explained the background.
So members, this item was put up. We don't actually go through the normal public art process for this because it's a proposed artwork on a council building. I thought I should bring it to council.
Sorry, aren't we doing, is that wrong?
That's wrong, yeah.
Oh, okay.
Yeah.
Page 155.
We're doing item 17
Gary.
on page 155.
Separate.
I thought it would be prudent to bring it to council because we're talking about putting a somewhat temporary artwork on the side of the council chamber, and just thought that was prudent to bring to council for decision rather than Richard or myself making that decision, and obviously council need to be aware of that. Just with this item coming up here, originally working with Bourne Festival, we put it on the council agenda rather than the CNS agenda, which is the week after next, just because of time frames involved. But we've, the Mayor wisely pointed out to me that our consultation with iwi, now that we received the actual proposed sketch, which is in PX, the public excluded part, and circulated to councillors, that our consultation with iwi won't be happening until next week, and also that council doesn't have the Māngai Māori representatives on it, but the CNS committee does. So we thought it'd be prudent that maybe we do carry it over to the CNS committee so that we can give you the results of that, the feedback from the Māngai Māori reps, and also the iwi group that we're going to consult with. And Boone have confirmed that they're comfortable with that. The time frames will be a little bit tighter and that sort of thing, but we just thought it'd be prudent that you have the full amount of information to make an informed decision. So we're suggesting, and the Mayor's going to move a procedural motion, that this item's moved to the CNS committee.
So I'm moving the procedural motion, which is on the board, seconded by the Deputy Mayor. So all those for? No. Any against? Carried unanimously. Okay, so we're now moving on to...
It's just a procedural motion to defer it to CNS.
Item 13, page 136. So I'll just hand this one over to Democracy to talk to.
Thank you, Mayor Andrew. As I emailed you all earlier, this is just to point out that through a mission on our part, item 13 is in the open section of the agenda, when in fact it should be in PX, for reasons of commercial sensitivity, primarily that making the information available would be likely to unreasonably prejudice the commercial position of the person who supplied or is the subject of the information, and also to enable council holding the information to carry out without prejudice or disadvantage negotiations. So with your resolution, please, can we move item 13 to public excluded, so that council disclosing, yep.
Material for this paragraph 12, you talk about the Finance and Monitoring Committee. Is that the Finance Committee? Or under our new structure, do we have something called that?
That was a very... So we can discuss this in PX, Councillor Mellett, but I think I'm safe to answer your question. That was a former committee of a former council.
Oh, okay. Well, how long ago was that?
It was there when I first started, so 6 years ago.
That used to be the Finance... Oh, okay.
Yep.
So I know it because I just thought under the new reporting we might have set something up called that.
So
Okay, so procedural motion moved by myself, seconded by the Deputy Mayor. All those for? Any against? Carried unanimously.
Thank you.
Okay, we're now moving through to item 14, page 138. Welcome, Nicholas.
Thank you. I'd like to just take the report as read, if that's acceptable, and answer any questions that you may have.
Deputy Mayor Martin? No. Okay. James, Leo. James, were you on this? Yep.
Thank you. Just to get it right in my mind, this building that we're talking about here is the old Department of Corrections building, is that correct?
That's correct.
Yeah. So the facilities in here, because I know there's a lot of training facilities and everything in there that's perfect for this sort of use?
Yes, it is. I mean, they're quite happy to accept transfer of those improvements. We don't own the buildings. They're owned by corrections. My understanding is that the one at the front is reasonably tidy, and the one at the rear of the section in the L part is quite old and is probably going to be demolished fairly smartly.
Yeah. Thank you.
Councillor Leo? Okay. You both might have worked at the same place before you started here. Councillor Mallett?
Thank you. Am I right in saying this is not a community lease we're talking about, is it?
No, it's not. It needs
So
to
this
return
is a market lease.
Correct.
But we're the owners of the land, not the improvements.
That's right.
So it's a land, I suppose you call it a land lease. do you?
It's
Something
ground
like that.
lease.
Ground lease, that's right.
Under the Municipal Endowment Fund. So it's required to obtain, to return the maximum possible rental. So we can't do a community lease in that.
So there's no suggestion of a ratepayer subsidy here.
No, none at all.
The buildings themselves, is that, and I think from what just got discussed, the Department of Corrections own those, and they will be charging, well, it's up to them what they do with those buildings, am I right?
Yes. So if we were continuing with our resolution, with the resolution to sell, we would be asking them to remove those because effectively our advice is they add no value to the land. The land is a development site if it's sold on the open market, and therefore there's a nominal 100k cost in the removal of those buildings, which is their obligation. Effectively, we wouldn't want to take over ownership of those under this leasing arrangement. We would lease the land to the entity at a commercial rate, and the buildings would be transferred to the lessee, and it would then be their ongoing responsibility to maintain and to look after those buildings and to remove them at the termination of the lease.
In fact, it is none of our business what happens to the buildings, is that right? Kind of, well.
It is, whilst we have a live resolution to demolish.
Okay.
If we are going to lease to effectively a commercial entity carrying out an activity, then we have less interest in those buildings.
Okay. So won't be, okay, I just want to be really clear, we will have no responsibility.
Correct.
Whilst, if this group, we agree, if this group get the lease, we will have no responsibility for maintaining, being a sanitary building.
No, they would own
insulation, anything like that.
They would own the buildings themselves. We would have no obligations at all in respect to those buildings.
Thank you.
Councillor Angela?
Nicholas, you just said while we have a live resolution to demolish, but that's not the resolution that's on page 138.
No, the resolution is to sell the land, and part of our negotiations with the corrections has been for them to remove their improvements, thereby maximising the value of the land when it came to sell.
Okay.
So effectively, at the termination of this lease, we say to them, look, you own those improvements, you can take them off now, please. They're of no value to us.
I understand now. So I'm just struggling to follow what's happened with this resolution, though. It's been 6 months, and don't get me wrong, I'm pleased we've found a new tenant. I didn't want us to sell it, but it's been 6 months where council resolved to sell this land. I would have thought that process would have started. So can you just work me through how these people have? Did we approach them? Did they approach us? Just the timeline?
No. So effectively, they have been approaching us on and off for some years around use of this site, but they've never been able to put together a concrete proposal until quite recently. So my obligation as steward of the Municipal Endowment Fund properties is obviously to ensure that they make the best return for the council. So in the absence of a viable commercial tenant, we moved to put in front of you that resolution to sell, which I was quite comfortable with, obviously, at the time. Since then, we've been having an ongoing discussion, I suppose is the kindest way of putting it, with corrections around removal of the improvements and thereby maximising the sale revenue when the property is brought to market. Corrections, I suspect, have not budgeted for the removal of the properties and are trying to get out of effectively their obligation to remove them. So while that has been going on, we've had a subsequent approach from the Family Trust, Family Start Trust, who have now secured funding for an ongoing program and are in a position to take on a commercial lease of the land. Given all of those things, we thought it prudent to bring the matter back to you for your decision.
And that sounds great. And so today's decision is approving them as new tenants for this lease.
Yes, there are two parts to it. The first is obviously to rescind the earlier resolution to sell, and the second is to approve a new lease to Family Start on commercial terms.
Yeah, and just one other question that's been raised on a different issue, but around, so they're able to operate this service, because this is going to be providing accommodation. They're not, under our district plan, they're not a residential house where they have to notify the neighbours around.
No, my understanding is that the activity that they're proposing is very consistent with the way in which this has been used in the past, at times in the past. And they were at pains to point out that this is not in any way a permanent accommodation arrangement. It's a short-term accommodation, people coming in, moving out once they've got premises to move to.
Yeah, great. Thank you.
Councillor Robb?
Chair, just in terms of the new lease, do we have any plans for how that land might be used? And I'm just asking that question in the context of potentially giving the new tenants up to 10 years by way of a lease and a right of renewal.
No, I think the short answer to that is no. What I think another sort of benefit off to the side of this particular one is that if you have a look there on that plan on page 141, you can see that there's to the north of the L-shaped section there's a scout hall which sits on council land but is a community lease.
So is that 73, is it?
77.
Oh, yeah, I see in the middle. Yep,
So,
I see. Yep.
Apparently, Scouts are looking at their property holdings over their entire portfolio, and it would certainly be beneficial for us when we come to sell 79 to include 77 as part of the package. It would certainly maximise the return and add significant value to the property that we have the resolution to sell. So I think longer term, this is a good stopgap measure. It ticks a number of boxes and also preserves our options in the future.
What's the zoning of the land, given that it looks as if there's a commercial in behind and resident? Is it residential in front or some residential?
Sorry, that's a very good question, and I'm not sure if I've got the answer on the top of my head. I might have to come back to you on that.
That's fine. If we, assuming that the lease gets granted, and let's say it runs for a full 10 years, and at that stage we want the land for you as a bare site, will the new lessee have the obligation to remove or demolish the building?
Yes, they will.
Yep. Thank you. Thank you, Chair.
Councillor Siggy?
Thank you so much, Mayor Andrew. Thank you, Nicholas, for that report. Just because of what it says here, what the lessee wants to do or is looking at demolishing the back house because it's older and building 1 and 2 bedroom homes on the side. So I'm just wondering, if we only give them 5 years of lease and then another 5, is that is it even worth for them to do that?
Yes, it is. They, one of the stipulations would be that given the short term of the lease, these are transportable.
Oh, yeah.
So effectively,
Okay.
they park a truck under them and take them away. And,
Okay.
and obviously, they wouldn't want to commit to the capital expenditure of building property that was fixed to the land. That would make no sense, really, for them.
Okay, thank you.
Deputy Mayor Martin.
Yes, I just, obviously this won't be, I assume it's not debated. Thank you for a very good report. Note the old Scout Hall, which I had a childhood connection with. If you're not back in March, I just want to take the opportunity to, just if I can, acknowledge your wonderful role in your role, wish you well, and apologise if I've given you any grief over the years, which I suspect I have. That isn't a formal apology, but good luck with Waikato District Council.
Thank you.
Thank you.
Thank you very much.
Okay, moved by myself, seconded by Deputy Mayor. All those for? Any against? Carried. Thank you, Nicholas, for your 10 years here. We'll see.
Younger a week ago.
Yeah. I keep that moustache off, it didn't suit you.
With no right of renewal, councillor.
Okay, so we're now going to page 143, item 15, and we'll hand over to the Democracy Manager, Lee and Jordan.
Thank you, Mayor Andrew. Elected members, you'll now be familiar as we go into our third year with this scheduler report. So effectively, the purpose of the report is just to provide transparency to you and the public about the program of work for the year. Governance's role primarily is in collating this information, delivering it to you, and then making sure you get the reports at the right meetings. If you have any questions, I'll do my best to answer them. Alternatively, any one of the GMs here may also be able to assist. Thank you.
Councillor Angela.
Leanne, just on under the policy and bylaw, the review policy and criteria for the appointment of Māori representatives is scheduled for April. Is that 12 months already then? That's not right, is it?
I believe originally when we moved the resolution to appoint to proceed, somewhere along the line we scheduled that we would look carefully to ensure that the criteria was still appropriate, and roles and responsibilities, because this first period has not been a trial exactly, but it's been an opportunity to see. As to the timing, I assume that it's there from the resolution, but we can check that. I would have thought that it would have been more appropriate, now that you mention it, to consider that ahead of the next, or at the beginning of the next triennium, rather than.
Yeah.
Is that your point?
Yes, that was definitely my point. And then just one to the CE. I am hopeful and pleased to see, if this is correct, that the adoption of the annual plan is the 20th of June council meeting. So that's correct, because normally it's on, the 11th hour of the 11th day. Because that has to be adopted by 31. Oh, the 11th month.
Because that's what it's currently scheduled for, yes.
Yeah, because it has to be adopted by 31 June, obviously. So.
Well, no. Big challenge
30
for us
June.
is the legislative requirement we have to do, which is we don't want to breach that, which is 30
No.
June. But we can't strike our rates until we've effectively.
Yeah, you're
adopted
preaching
our
to the converted here,
Yeah.
but
We need. It gives us
that's
time.
an anomaly, that the adoption is set down 10 days before it's actually due. It's normally 1 or 2, that's my point. So
Sean, that's all correct, isn't it?
that is correct, and
Yeah,
it's
that's
not going
correct.
to change, so that's good.
It's not going to change, and you're not jinxing it, Councillor O'Leary, I hope.
Yeah, all right. Yeah, thanks.
Councillor Gary.
Thank you. In the policy and bylaw square, there's appointment and remuneration of boards of and board members and CCOs and CCTO policy 2014. Then you come down about 1, 2, 3, 4, 5, 6, 7 or 8 squares, and it looks like the same thing again. Remuneration of board members of COs, CCOs and CTOs policy.
Yes, I'm reliably informed that's a double up.
Oh, it is a double up, is it? Okay. Well, maybe I got yours in, Angela. That's why I got the double up.
Okay, so moved by myself, seconded by councillor James. All those for, any against? Carried unanimously. Okay, item 16, page 147. Thank you, Leanne.
Thank you, Mayor Andrew. No one will have missed the fact that it's an election year this year. My team has pulled together a report that serves two purposes. One is just to give you a little bit of background to our project planning for the elections for this year, which operation will be managed by Becca Brock. But also, if your council so chooses, the legislation provides for you to choose the order of names, candidate names on the documentation. You don't have to. If you elect not to make that decision, we default to alphabetical. So, happy to answer any questions, and also if council chooses to determine the order of names, there's a recommendation there to guide you on that as well. Thank you.
Councillor Ryan.
Thanks, Chair. Just a question, Leanne, in the way that recommendation or potential motions worded, will we be voting individually on alphabetical, pseudo-random or random, or do you need a clear resolution one way or the other?
Yes, we would be looking for a motion to come forward with a preferred option of one of those three, and then obviously anybody else is welcome to put up an amendment if they didn't agree with the motion.
I'd like to propose a motion for random order.
Seconded by councillor Jeff. Councillor Angela.
On page 150, a couple of questions on 153, just on this timetable there. I note that the submitter this morning, I'm sort of in, I don't know, it's 153, the pull-out here. I'm in the 2019 elections webpage up and running key information, blah, 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 but there's also something on there about candidate information evenings. The submitter this morning, Deborah Fisher, mentioned that we don't put candidate meetings up, but certainly in the 4 elections I've been through, we do. So I'm assuming whether we run them or not, that's the only place you know where to go for candidate information evenings. So I'm assuming we're going to do that again.
Where we are aware that those meetings take, where people do let us know, absolutely. We provide all apolitical information that we are able to provide on that website.
Yeah, and we've always done that, so I'm not too sure. Perhaps it was... Not always, but last election we did. Okay. And there was promotion of that. Yeah. Oh, well, maybe it's the promotion she's talking about. So now, the information, I guess in that same space, when do elected members find out when are we given the information that pertains to us in terms of things like if we're using a council phone, we can't use that number on material and the communication. So when do elected members stop being referred to in media releases? And because that period's quite different.
So there's a period of 3 months prior to the election. So I keep looking at Becca, but just double check, tag team this one. But for the period 3 months prior to elections, we're super especially careful. I'm currently drafting the protocols for elected members, which is about the things you need to know going into it in terms of what you are and aren't able to do, social media, all those kinds of things. So you'll receive that information soon.
Okay, so I did, when you talk about the 3 months before elections,
Excuse me, just this is getting pretty off topic, so I'm sure there will be feedback coming from democracy on this, because this is about,
No, it's about both things, Mayor Andrew.
no.
okay,
the whole-
apologies. Okay,
Yeah.
continue.
Thanks. Okay, so that'll come to us soon. And then, and I did raise this with the CE, that there has always been a prior period before the election period, before that 3 months, where, and sorry, I combined my questions before, around, like chairs of committees and things being quoted in media releases and stuff. So will we get that information as well? I know that's it's a management policy, and the CE's coming back to me on that, but
Yeah, it is the election protocols.
it's still that, okay.
Okay. So just above the mid-crease of the page, where it says review elections protocol for staff and elected members,
Yep.
done by in Feb 2019, agree on the communication of protocol. So yes, we will handle all that and provide the guidance around what you need to do in the normal conduct of your role as a councillor or a leadership position of council versus what's electioneering.
And also, will that cover so we can understand what the staff protocols are as well, so that they don't come under pressure from an elected member saying, well, I want it to be quoted in that media release, so that we understand it's a difficult time for staff. Okay.
It is. So as you can see from there, we're framing protocols for staff. There'll be some overlap so that both management and governance understand the expectations of each other during this period.
Great, thank you.
Councillor Jones.
Thank you, Chair. Under page 151, cultural considerations, 37. They can provide statements in both English and Maori. I have no problem with that, because I'm pretty good at Google Translate. So, but has any consideration been given to any other languages? Because we're not actually a bicultural society, we are multicultural. And you could have candidates who are of Chinese, Samoan, Tongan, or even Afrikaans speaking that may wish to speak in their own language. Or German.
Official languages of New Zealand.
Is it only official languages?
So what we're typically dealing with here is central government legislation around this.
Yeah.
What we can do with our council communications around things is think about the extent to which we can make them as accessible as possible. And we are doing quite a lot of thinking around that. So, for example, on Friday, Becca and I are participating in a presentation at the Blind Foundation, and we're also looking at sign language and the use of the right formats of written information so that blind people can have them translated through their computers. It's not a logical extension to think about for large ethnic groups, the extent to which we may be able to make some things available in languages other than English or Māori, but we haven't finished investigating that yet, so I can't give you a firm answer about exactly what we'll do there.
Okay, so it may be that people could give an introduction in both English and what?
I think no. So in terms of the candidate, so I'm making a distinction between the candidate booklet, which is the, official government legislated, if you like, form. You have 150 words. So if someone chose to use some of the 150 words to present the information in another language, I guess it's entirely their choice. We won't be translating that into languages on behalf of candidates. In fact, just to be really clear, we're not even allowed to move a full stop or a comma in the candidate statement. They are emphatically and completely the candidate's own words. Yeah.
Okay, thank you. I'm just brushing up my Swahili, so thank you.
Councillor Mark.
I prefer you actually call me Councillor Adam Anderson from here on, just in case. The question is, on point 17, on page 148, is that cast in stone? Because it strikes me that if you're going to have random order, that's actually where the more impact would be, rather than just on the voting form.
So because this is my first election as governance manager, I actually had the exact same question,
Yeah.
Councillor Bunting, and so we contacted Dale Ofsosky, Becca did, who's our electoral officer. He advised that while it's not legislatively required, practically, it's effectively logistically impossible.
It's expensive too.
Because of the way the system that they use to generate the booklets, the cost involved for the provider of that service to us to change the way that works, they're telling us it can't be done. He's also, however, confirming, and which is that every council is in the same situation, so it's not just us. There are two providers of electoral services. Both companies print the candidate booklet in alphabetical order because they feel they can't do it any other way.
Yeah, I can get the logistics. I was thinking even if you had 4 or 5 different ones, and that's general discussion. Thank you.
Yep.
Adam.
Thank you, Councillor Adam.
Or Alison, whichever you prefer.
Councillor Gary.
And you might say that I shouldn't be talking about this, but just that meeting thing that we're talking about, surely we, like what Debbie was, as Debbie Fisher was talking about, surely we can't be responsible for anyone's meetings other than officially sanctioned ones that council runs.
That's correct.
Yes, so even if it's a big organisation like Rotary or a tiny, like some small organisation, I don't know, Afrikaners for New Zealand, I don't know, some real little, I don't use the word fringe in a derogatory way.
I understand.
But pardon? Yeah. So how surely you wouldn't want to, the council would be unwise for council to assume any responsibility for that.
And nor do we.
Yeah, so what, perhaps we could have been a bit more straight with her and say, no, that's not our job. And it's wrong for us to actually be that.
It's a more complicated conversation than one that public forum really lends itself to. And I understand because, as I think we all know, Ms Fisher's submitted and or made her views around some of these things known. And I think her general point is, which I completely accept, the extent to which we can make information about everything that's going on with the elections as widely available as possible and as accessible to as many people as possible. She'd like to see that happen. There is a lot of confusion in the public between what we as council can do and as ourselves and what we're required to do by central legislation. It's very hard to communicate that simply to the public in general.
Because to the extent it's on the council website, it may come across as sanctioned by.
It's been endorsed by council. Yeah.
So there's many disclaimers onto it as well, though.
We're very
Having said that,
aware.
you might have a page that says these are the things that we've been alerted to. We can't vouch for any of these people, but yeah.
Well, we cover that off.
Oh, we do. Staff are very aware.
Start off with a dirty great disclaimer.
The perception that, the reality that council must be politically neutral and ensuring that the perception lines up for that. If you saw anything that suggested that wasn't the case, please let me know because it would be inadvertent. Yeah.
Thank you.
You're welcome.
Deputy Mayor Martin.
Yes, just, so obviously there'll be some information booklet put out in terms of what we can do and not do within, and the magic date is, I assume, July 12th, because that's a 3-month period. That's from all intents and purposes the campaign period.
July, yes.
The issue that a number of people have raised with the reduction of New Zealand Post boxes, because we're only still on the postal system, what opportunities will you have to feed back to us your view of where boxes should be located? And I do get City Council and libraries and all of that, but I would like a discussion as to where else strategically and safely they may be placed, because I'm acutely aware that we have now, compared with 3 years ago, a reduction of ability of people to post stuff.
And I think you know me well enough, Deputy Mayor, to take this next comment in the spirit in which it's intended, which is to start very clearly being apolitical. we're happy to receive elected member suggestions and feedback in terms of their observations or lessons learned that they think might be of help to us. The location of boxes and things like that will be a management decision in terms of the running of the elections. That said, we are very conscious of the limitations and constraints on the postal system and have been in conversation with both with the Electoral Commission and others to talk about where we could have boxes and indeed getting additional staff and potentially staff in other organisations trained and certified as electoral officers for the purposes of having voting boxes there. So the obvious big places like the hospital, the university, places where people gather are worth thinking about, and we'll explore that to try and make sure that as much as possible we can go to the community. And in doing that, obviously, we'll need to think carefully to ensure that we're fair.
Ryan and I are very happy to have a box outside our house.
Just supplementary, I guess, and an observation. Hypothetical, like Chartwell Fine, we have our library, we can advertise big. You go there. The base, for example, the hospital, as you say, the university doesn't. They are the places where there's not an obvious council location. So I really welcome that kind of discussion. Also, if we looked at the general election with spread voting, and I'm not saying we can duplicate that at all. There was quite a range of options available, prior to the actual polling day itself. But if you could, I get you, any suggestions you receive, and then you make a clinical decision as to where and how those boxes are located as returning officer. Thank you.
Councillor Robb.
Yeah, thanks, Chair. My question is around electoral spends, and I'm seeking from Democracy perhaps some clear guidelines with examples and timings and so forth of what actually constitutes amounts that need to be included in candidates' spending returns when they file those after the election. I think there's quite a bit of confusion out there about what constitutes an election spend, whether it's a cheque being written out or a donated service or a volunteer who's doing work for free. And then there's also the question around timing, that it's fair to say that there's already some electioneering happening at the moment, and it's only January or February. And it's just a matter of making sure that when we do file our returns, that we are filing them accurately.
Yeah. And to that end, Governance Unit's responsibility will be to refer you to our electoral officer, Dale Ofskovsky, and to the relevant legislation. But for a definitive decision on those matters, that is his role. That's what we employ him
but
to
isn't that an action point that requires somebody to complain? That somebody might complain and think I've spent more than I put in my return, which isn't really the way that most of us would want to do that.
So Dale, the service that we asked Dale to provide to you is opportunity for you as elected members to test your understanding or get the answers to any questions you may have about something that appears to be ambiguous in the legislation. Our role is to make sure you're informed about the legislation. But where people want to discuss the particulars of matters, could this thing be considered this way, or can I read it into that bit of the legislation? That's a conversation for Dale. Dale also will receive complaints from members of the public or other candidates or whatever about things, and we'll look at those. That's also his role as electoral officer. But he is the person to provide a definitive guidance on the application of the rules. We can tell you what they are. He's the expert in terms of interpreting them, particularly in terms of national and other kinds of application over time.
So are the rules easy to understand? Because I understand that they're not.
Well,
or they're capable of considerable variation in interpretation?
I couldn't
No,
comment
look, I'm
other
not
than to
saying yes or
say,
no, asking you to say
Yep.
yes or no in that
So,
regard. I guess I'm looking to see if there was a 2 or 3 page information sheet that we could have to give us examples of what would be regarded as electoral spending that would go into our returns and what clearly isn't, and, you know, again, relating that to the timing of the spend, and to some degree what we've said.
Yep.
In that.
So I think wouldn't presume to speak for Dale, but certainly the conversations I've had with him around the by-election and to a certain extent in preparation for this year, he will be very clear about what you clearly can and cannot do.
Can I just add, Rob, that most of the information that you're seeking is actually will be in the candidate information booklets that come out. So that big book that we sort of create.
Yep.
So there's quite a bit of information in there around that aspect.
I don't recall there being a lot in the past ones.
There
that
are
I
grey
read,
areas potentially,
Yeah,
shall we say,
okay.
Councillor Pesco, and I think that's what you're potentially
I'm looking
referring
for
to.
a bit more certainty.
It
yeah.
could be interpreted this way, or possibly it could be interpreted that way.
Yep.
In those situations, we wouldn't give you an opinion at all. We would refer you to Dale, and Dale may not even definitely say one way or the other. At the end of the day, he's legislatively responsible for providing what is clear under the law. Not
Okay.
help. I
Okay,
understand.
all right. I appreciate your attempt to answer my question. Thank you.
Failure as it was, yes.
Councillor Dave.
Yeah, look, I want to go back to the point Angela made about meetings and the bit of a discussion that started there about election meetings, is I think we should be going all out to promote the ones that we know about and encourage or assist other people in calling them. One of the reasons the good things that happened last time wasn't just that we had a meetings register that was showing there. Anyone wanting to call a meeting could coordinate so they didn't double up. We've had problems like that in the past where the meetings were doubled up, so it provided a good public service as well as for the voters and for the meeting organisers. The only downside was for the East Ward candidates, because there were clearly a lot less meetings on the East than the West, which is why the West got such a group of brilliant candidates elected. The other one was in relation to point 24 on page 150, where Auckland Council took an analysis and said that it didn't matter that your name was Aardvark, it didn't give you an advantage. I would question that, noting that we had Councillor Ted Armstrong elected for 27 years, and he was always the top of the alphabet, and so much so that he was called Councillor Aardvark in most meetings. So I suggest that their research was not as good as our research.
Who's going to answer that question?
I wasn't a question. We were supposed to be asking questions. Oh, sorry.
Councillor Siggy.
Well, I've got one. Look, will you let us know about the rules of using logos or city crests in election year?
Yes.
Okay, great. Thank you.
What's the question?
Oh, about using rules of using logos, like city logos or the crest, you know, Hamilton City crest for in the election year, whether there's different rules, you know, for using that. I just would like to know.
I think what would be useful is that we clearly delineate with respect, there's no such thing as an election, I don't mean this in any discourteous way, it's not an election year. As I understand it, the critical point is 3 months out, so July the 12th becomes the major date. So, for example, even this community radio free FM slots, City Democracy is working it through to ensure that basically councillor comments, elected member comments, stop by the 12th. So there's a whole, and I think if through the governance, it'd be really useful that we get a, you know, there's a certain line, and I can understand at the point at which I used a crest beyond the July the 12th, I'm clearly electioneering as against a helpful road sign that is purely there for public information.
So there is a hard line in terms of 3 months out, and there is a context for everything prior to that. if the way things are managed within a context
Yes.
constitutes electioneering, it is electioneering whether it's further than 3 months out or not. And so we will provide guidance. If you're unclear about the guidance, you're welcome to talk to us, and I would strongly encourage you to contact Dale if you had any concerns about whether what you were doing will constitute electioneering and whether those costs might be proportionately attributed to the 3-month period or not.
And obviously, through the chair, it's a given, and no offence will be taken if you, in your capacity as assistant returning officer, may have occasion to do a discreet phone call to said elected member to point out and assist them in terms of that line that's been crossed.
We're here to assist everyone to get it right and keep themselves and council safe in this process, because obviously it's a bit, you know, it's about the candidates, about councillors, and it's also about council as an organisation and public perception of neutrality.
Sure.
So, Democracy Manager, from what you've just said, you've left doubt in our minds that the 3 months preceding the election may well not be when you start to count the spend, that I mean, you've left us in a very precarious state of everyone around this table.
I don't believe I have. What is it that I've said, Mayor Andrew, that I need to clarify?
I'm understanding. Yeah, you haven't come back and said, no, of course not, it's 3 months out and 3 months in is when it starts. And we all know that's how it is.
So it's not,
And you've
what
run
I'm
elections before.
I'm saying it's, what constitutes electioneering is not as hard and fast as it may appear. So my consistent message today, Mayor Andrew, is if anyone is doing anything that could be interpreted, is intended to be electioneering or could be interpreted as electioneering, and they're not entirely clear that they're straight with the legislation, that you check with Dale.
Yes, what?
That you check with Dale. He's our electoral officer. He's here to assist people with exactly the kind of question you're just asking me, Mayor Andrew. And you're frowning at me as well.
If you're following that line of thinking, I would have thought, if you're implying that anything could count, it just becomes impossible. I just understood it was very clear that it was 90 days beforehand, bam. But
it's not.
You're leaving us in doubt.
Well, I'm not leaving you in, well, maybe I am leaving you in doubt. What I want to say is it's not bam. And in order to not speculate in an unhelpful way about giving you information that I'm actually not sufficiently expert or experienced enough, which is why we hire Dale, that I'm just saying, if in doubt, check it out, essentially. But I do have some... if you would like me, Andrew, I have an email from that Becca's reminded me that I received from Dale that refers to this matter. I could read it out if you'd like, or I could send it on to elected members after.
I think it would be helpful to read it out.
There is a 3-month official applicable period, 12th of July to 12th of October 2019, for recording election expenses. But the law does require any expenditure undertaken prior to this period on election promotion that is also used within the applicable period to be, in its inverted commas, fairly apportioned between before and during the applicable period. Potential candidates are not required to declare their expenditure and donations received until after the election, which is early December 2019.
And so with an example of that bit you called, so if you bought all your signs 6 months ago and the cost was, that still has to be counted because it's when you're using the signs, or whatever it is. Is that targeting that?
That's part of
So
that,
that seems a reasonably obvious one, eh?
Yeah, you got it, Dave. Good example.
I'll carry that through, right through to
Yeah,
the...
even though,
No,
even though you're not in the 3
No,
months,
but you have to fairly apportion, and the legislation doesn't tell you what's fair, it leaves it up to you, a certain amount from there through to the election period. So you have to claim a certain amount.
50% of the account, or whatever you choose to
Yeah,
do.
yeah,
Yep.
because I checked that out with Dale.
Chair, that was exactly what I was hoping to achieve in my question, was to give us some guidance on exactly Gary's suggestion of buying my signs now and hiding them in the garage.
No, just, you still got to claim it.
Or doing like Carl's Angela's done hers,
Yeah.
and then deciding whether, you know, that period started on the 12th of July or on the 10th of March when I had the car.
But Leanne's point is,
So that's what I
but
was
check with
hoping we
Dale.
might achieve,
And
is some
Dale,
sort of guidance, and that way we could at least all be consistent
yes,
with what we report when we submit those returns, because I'm jolly sure that some of those returns that went in last time were either, were incorrect either deliberately or because of the interpretation of what those rules were.
I understand that this
Hang
is an
on,
area where
that's-
people would like guidance generally. I'm
That-
talking.
You can't say
Andrew.
that, Rob, councillor Rob. You're implying that people had cheated and
Deliberately or unsuspectingly.
it's a very big call, councillor Rob, of what you're implying with the statement.
Debating election
Yeah.
expense, but this is on voting order.
alphabet, it's about alphabet, isn't it, this one?
Well, it's on both, councillor Ryan, but happy to return to that part of the report. But can I, there is just one more thing, in fairness to me and my team, that I need to say. Whilst our best endeavour will be to provide you with information, and as well put together information as we can, anything which you choose to rely on, advice you choose to rely on in defence of your electoral returns needs to come from Dale. It cannot come from me. You can't say that, well, Leanne told me I could, for example. I just want to be super clear about that. That's the role of the electoral officer, okay?
Well said. All right, councillor Jones.
Just to get it right in my mind, so, like if Mayor Andrew brought his building size signs right through from where they are now through to the election time past 12 July, that would be apportioned?
You would have that conversation with Dale, I'd suggest, but based on the piece of information I just read out,
Yeah,
it could be interpreted potentially that was the case, depending on how things came through.
okay.
And that's why there's lots of it depends around this. Context is everything.
So saying Merry Christmas.
Hang on, Gary, stop,
I don't want to discuss it
please.
specifically.
Councillor, press the button if you want to talk. Councillor Deputy Mayor Martin.
No, I think obviously your key word is Dale
The key
there,
word
and
is
the
Dale.
key word is
Yeah.
if activities were specific to March, February, April, but had no relationship, that's clear. But if in fact the signs were carrying on, then you apportion it. But if suddenly you did a big, we'll just say someone did a big tabloid wrap now, and that was a one-off, that wouldn't count. But if in fact that tabloid,
Or it might.
or it might. But if in doubt, ask Dale.
If in doubt, ask Dale.
Yep, cool.
So Andrew's stuff that he's doing, which
I'm
is...
not going to comment.
Hang on, don't
I
get
just
into
want to be clear for
specific.
what?
Don't get into specific campaigns.
Well,
Gary,
I'm trying to
don't-
get an example, because
No, no.
nothing works unless there's an example.
But I can't provide you with
Okay,
that
all right,
example.
so,
Ring up Gary, ring up Dale.
all right.
It's public service.
Well, I
Okay,
don't think it's electioneering.
so moved by myself, seconded by the Deputy Mayor.
Hang on, Mayor Andrew, we've got a specific recommendation. Oh, sorry,
Sorry.
Hamilton Kesson.
Councillor Hamilton Casson, that's the...
All those for? Sorry, debate. Councillor Angela.
Yes, just a couple of observations. Look, thank you to the Governance Manager for including that Auckland report. It sent me on a bit of a Google search around, was it? Thank you, Becca, around the world actually. And I support random. It seems like it would be easier to support alphabetical for the voter, but I think if we're concerned about voter turnout, and I certainly am, then we shouldn't be concerned that it might take a voter a couple of more seconds to look for the candidate that they want to vote for. What was interesting and what I found was that even though there is a small risk in alphabetical, it still is a risk, and we need to do everything we can to manage any form of risk, even if it is small. There is a lot of evidence overseas, and contrary to the Auckland report that I looked at over the weekend, that actually does say that you're getting up to 8, 9 and 10% advantage when it is alphabetical. So I found that quite interesting. So yes, support random order.
Councillor Mark.
Adam, thank you very much. I'm pretty relaxed about it. I would actually support alphabetical, not actually because my last name starts with B, but actually because there's a few. Eh? Yeah, well, quite relaxed. But I just think we've picked the wrong tree to bark up against here, and I will make that point. I think we've made great noises with our online voting debate to make everything as easy as we possibly can for voter turnout. I think adding another little obstacle in here, it's more annoying than anything else. I don't think it's going to stop anyone with half a brain finding the right candidate. I'm a little bit more confused with regards to the pre-election time spending now, because I'm thinking, for example, and I'm not having a crack here, but Councillor Henry's car that's been sign written for the entire term, it'll be a query I'll be making about how do you pay for that. So, and I'm thinking about the signs that I've bought, and I'm not intending to buy any more signs if I decide to stand. Yeah, so that's thinking out loud now. Waffling, wasting everybody's time. I will support the motion, but I think we're sort of wasting a bit of time.
Deputy Mayor.
I'll help Councillor Munting. Councillor Henry's car's got nothing whatsoever to do with the election. That she's decided to do that to her great credit over 3 years as part of her day-to-day job. And obviously when the election campaign, it'll be authorised by, and that's totally different, totally separate. The random stuff is really, all we're doing is status quo, and my understanding is that we're in line with DHB and the Waikato Regional Council, so apart from the DHB having having STV preferential, the ballot papers essentially are exactly the same for all three, which I think is good and consistent.
All those for? Any against? Carried unanimously. So, we'll move to exclude the public. Moved by myself, seconded by Councillor Gary. All those for? Any against? Carried. Thank you, Democracy, and particularly Leanne, for the work you've put into those last two papers.
You're welcome. I'd like to acknowledge Becca. She's done a great